Hello, my name is Gabe Roberts, and I have the pleasure today of having a conversation with a good friend of mine, Penny Thompson. Penny, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Gabe. How are you?
I'm doing well, very blessed as always. Um, I kind of talk to my kids about this. I try to start the day off with some thankfulness. And so today I'm thankful not only for you, but for technology that would allow me to be sitting in Nashville, Tennessee, having this conversation with you. So this is really good. Now, Penny, you are someone who needs no introduction, but for those who may be watching, I want to talk about my first introductions to you and the fact that 8 years later, I'm here having a conversation with you and counting you as a friend is really quite remarkable. You are the former deputy director of CMCS, among many other things. You are the former chair of MacPac. You are an extremely successful consultant in the healthcare space. You're one of the Medicaid rock stars. And my first introduction to you back in the early teens was seeing your name on a bunch of instructional information and sub-regulatory guidance to states in the Medicaid space. So it's really remarkable to get to talk to you. So thank you for being here with us today. And thank you for all your work and your service, especially to the Medicaid population.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you, Gabe, and to have a chance to talk about the issues that are in front of us now. And I thank you for all of your efforts and service for the Medicaid program and beneficiaries in Tennessee.
Well, thank you so much. So, again, for those who don't know, one of your other honors is that it was recently announced that you were joining the board of Sellers Dorsey. So,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Thank you. And so excited to be part of this team, which has a unique and singular focus on the
That's
Medicaid
right.
program.
That's right. And I have had the privilege of working with many of the Sellers Dorsey folks for years, and have been a senior advisor to the firm now for almost a year. And it's really remarkable, to your point, this mission driven culture that the firm has about really going in and helping clients realize opportunities around the Medicaid population, with kind of the central tenet being trying to increase access for members of the program and really drive performance and outcomes. And somebody like you joining the firm's board, I just can't think of a better person. So again, congratulations for that.
Thanks a lot. Really excited to be part of this journey.
So you and I have had a few kind of back and forths about, as Medicaid people do, about what's kind of going on right now. And there's a lot of things going on right now. And you so eloquently put it that the status quo is not an option anymore in Medicaid. Do you want to explain just a little bit about kind of what you were thinking there, and maybe that can guide our conversation today?
Sure. I think that those of us who have spent a lot of time with and on this program trying to continue to move it forward and continue to make it better for beneficiaries, particularly, and for the providers and other stakeholders, plans who play such an important part in the program, should feel both a sense of progress and a sense of dissatisfaction. And I think that that's kind of a healthy place to be,
Mm-hmm.
which is always a little bit dissatisfied with where we are and where how fast we've gotten to where we wanted to go. And I think that all of us during the last period of time with struggling through and with the COVID pandemic have appreciated both the importance of the Medicaid program and the strength of the Medicaid program, but also appreciate how far it still has to go in helping communities recover from this pandemic and thinking about its place in the necessary conversation about healthcare in this country and the continued transformation that we're all working on to ensure that our system of care is really there for everyone in the country and is performing at the level that it needs to perform in order to help ensure people's health as well as provide important care to them.
That's such a smart way to put it. This tension of not here but not there yet, right? Like we've done so much, we've come so far, and yet there's still so far to go. And it's interesting that tension is really something that I think, quite frankly, is we're seeing in a lot of phases of life right now. Really
Right.
satisfied on progress, but also understand with a sober mindset of kind of where we need to go. And I think to that piece, to your point, we've seen as a healthcare system, and especially in Medicaid, over the last 18 months or so, some things really highlighted. We understand that Medicaid is, because it really is, there's a huge diversity of populations that we cover. It's kind of from
Mhm.
cradle to grave,
Yeah.
newborns up to end of life, and so we've got that kind of complexity. But then we also see other things, and you and I have talked about this before, but the pandemic has really kind of laid to bear some inequities that have really
Right.
kind of manifested themselves, or at least been able to be more visible than perhaps they have been in the past. Disparities in both health status and outcomes, but also just in access. In terms of things to think about, or
Mhm.
things that maybe not being talked about as much as perhaps some of us think we should, um, what are your thoughts on like return to care initiatives, and what are your thoughts on like kind of the near term policy implications of things that we and other policymakers have learned over the last year and a half?
Well, we talk about, a lot of people have said this, right? That COVID has laid bare
Hmm.
some of the continued fragmentation in our system, some of the issues, as you mentioned, around inequities in our system, the particular vulnerabilities of Black and Brown communities, of rural communities, of effects on people with disabilities, uh, people who are in need of long-term services and supports. And I think maternal health care, I think as we've thought about some of these different kinds of populations and issues, what we should really think to ourselves about is, one, it reminds us of the urgency of continuing to make progress on these issues and to really tackle them. I think when we talk about the status quo as not being an option, we also need to think about, if we're not getting where we want to go as quickly as we need to, then what are we going to change? And how are we going to think differently about how we look at the healthcare system and how we think about its organization, the way in which we fund it, the way in which we bring people into systems of care, who's involved in providing services, what kinds of supports they're receiving, et cetera. So I think these are all the active conversations that we need to be involved in. I think we understand better than we ever had before the importance of the connections between public health, primary care, prevention, the importance of community-based, trusted providers inside of our healthcare system, and our need to really think about, how do we engage all the people that are contributing to health in alignment and with the appropriate kinds of payments and incentives and support that can help make them successful.
That's so smart. I love the connection of a public health mindset with Medicaid. And Medicaid is
Yeah,
such a large
absolutely.
budget in every state. It's such a huge deal at the federal level. And it really is a shame if the folks that are kind of running the programs and developing the policies don't have that kind of mindset. And I think it's a connection that's been clear for years. And that's encouraging, but I do think it's so smart. And I think that's a great segue. Right. I mean, one of the things as a Medicaid director and as a policymaker, and certainly as a federal regulator, you're really concerned about losing progress or losing momentum because of the lack of sustainability and funding.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I've had conversations with a lot of folks is just a really big appreciation for where the federal government has been in terms of increased FMAP for states during the
Yeah.
pandemic, and other things. But this idea that you touched on around what I would call an innovator's mindset in
Hmm.
Medicaid is really necessary because status quo is not there. How that not only can impact policy development and innovation and connection to care and engagement, like you talked about, but also really interestingly dovetails with funding opportunities and being smart from a funding standpoint. This may be unfair, but I'll just ask this question. Is there anything that has particularly crossed your mind in the last 6 months around what would be really interesting, or what perhaps is a really interesting tool or need that a Medicaid director or a provider, and a large provider in a Medicaid system would really need to kind of be thinking about over the next year or two?
Well, that is a very big question, but I would say that there's both the near-term issue, which is there are a lot of opportunities to think about financing and funding right now, and a lot of opportunities through the American Rescue Plan Act that states need to take advantage of. And that in and of itself is a big lift
Hmm.
at a time of significant strain on providers, on plans, and on state Medicaid agencies as they think about, how do I take advantage of some of those new funding opportunities? How do I coordinate them with other things that I'm already doing? How do I use those funds to address known gaps? How do
Hmm.
I think about making sure that with those additional resources, I'm being creative and innovative and imaginative about some different ways that we can look forward into the future? So that's a big planning strategy, funding, coordination activity that states are going to need to be involved in. And I hope that plans, providers, others are really leaning in to participating in that conversation. And of course, we have the public health emergency. And at some point that will end. At some point, the enhanced FMAP that came with that public health emergency is also going to go away. States really need to be thinking about and planning for that. And then I think as we consider all of these different needs in front of us as we recover from COVID, I think there's reverberations inside of our communities that we need to understand. We have to be really in close contact with the front lines.
Mm.
So the community leaders, the beneficiaries, the community-based organizations, and other and providers at the front lines, who really understand what has happened in their communities, what their communities now need in order to recover from COVID. How do we prepare for potential new threats
Mm.
of variants, and continue to make the appropriate investments to both strengthen the network that we have today and also to expand it to include all of those who can contribute to this mission. So one of the things that I hope that people are talking about in terms of moving forward, and that I know that we're talking about within Sellers Dorsey, is really how do we think about um, orchestrating all of the resources that are available at the community level, bringing people together, looking at the results that we're seeking, thinking about the changes that are needed, and proposing ways in which we can really understand both the resources that can be brought to bear on that problem, the ways in which we can finance and support
Mhm.
those activities, and assess results and make refinements as time goes on.
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes Medicaid so complex, is also one of the things that really draws me to it, which is that it really does
Yeah,
vary state by state, right? And that makes
right.
sense because the states have so many different needs, different regionalities, different demographics, different health issues they need to address. And this idea of aligning these new funding models or these new funding opportunities, even if they're temporary, to be able to create some momentum around some issues that
That's
really
right.
are impacting the states is really fascinating. And one of the things that I do think that the firm is really well suited in is being able to really kind of come along and help understand and navigate a really complex area, right? Medicaid finance is a perfect example. When you're trying to deal with all of the stakeholders and the legislature, perhaps, and the
Hmm.
Medicaid agency, perhaps, and understanding even the stakeholders within hospital systems, for example, the outcome can be really beautiful, though, because you can really harness a lot of these tailwinds and then help clients focus it. So that's a
That's
really
right.
great. One other thing
But
you mentioned,
Gabe,
I'm sorry.
I do think that while we want to always be thinking about what does this evolve to in terms of I don't know that we can ever talk about permanent in the context of Medicaid, but an ongoing activity is that we really need to think about how do we take advantage of creating that momentum and learn as we go, while we're also looking ahead to what can become a permanent part of the program, what can become an ongoing payment model that can, as appropriately reward and incentivize the people that are making the difference for our beneficiaries. This pandemic has, once again reinforced the importance of things like home and community-based care, the need to think about digital health, the desire to engage community health workers, to build trust in communities, to think about access differently. So we have a lot of moving pieces that we need to organize, and we don't want to wait until we figured it all out to begin.
Right.
So we have to begin before we figured it all out.
That's
and
right.
We have to have an active conversation ongoing about what we're learning and what we want to move into a more stable and permanent arrangement, what we want to do as more risk-taking and experimentation, and what we want to do as more flexible investment in the infrastructure that supports all those activities.
Right. I think that's a great segue kind of to the third area you and I've talked about, which is really leadership, not only in times of crisis, but just generally thinking about kind of vision casting. And to your point about saying, how do we harness the opportunity today to really slingshot us into the future? And again, as we talked about, Medicaid sometimes can be a little bit of a quilt work across states and regions, and that's okay. So how do we align
program, really, I think.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what would what are your thoughts? I'm sure you have some around the value of kind of a big picture kind of seer, if you will, whether it's a regulatory policymaker, whether it's a Medicaid director, or perhaps whether it's an executive in a really large hospital system. Like, what are some of the things you think can really you've kind of mentioned them, but what are some of the things you think could really be interesting characteristics or interesting thoughts or goals or things they should be really trying to implement as they collectively are trying to help us pull ourselves kind of out of this pandemic?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say two things that seem contradictory, but I think are both true, which is in life often the case, which is individuals matter and it takes a village.
Right.
Right. So, I do think that there are in every state and across the nation healthcare champions, people who are really devoting their lives and their energy to thinking about what our healthcare system should really look like and how it can become a true healthcare system rather than a sickness system. And that's not just in Medicaid, right? I mean, that's true across the board, where everyone involved in the healthcare system understands, and we've been talking for many, many years about the need for coordination to address the fragmentation in the system, the need for person-centered care. And we've talked precision-based medicine. We need to talk about precision-based care in the sense of really meeting the needs of the individual where they are, in context of their family and context of their community. And so I think that one thing that state Medicaid leaders have done and proven to be useful is really to engage that larger community of thought leaders. And I think the more that Medicaid can operate as part of a statewide system and a national system of attempting to address some of these inequities and weaknesses in our healthcare system, the better off the program will be. Now, it does have its unique characteristics, and it's a major player and payer around mental health services, long-term services and support, maternity care, children's coverage. And so it has some unique characteristics and elements that make it a little bit different from other payers. And when you're addressing a low-income population, you're addressing some of the more complex needs in our communities. And so I think the program operates best when it operates in concert with other payers, but appreciating its special characteristics and needs. I also think that state Medicaid programs have benefited over the years from collaboration amongst the states, something that I know that you've appreciated over the years, and Sellers Dorsey has been involved with over the years in terms of really bringing cross-state collaboration to the table, because states really benefit from learning from each other and adapting each other's lessons to their particular delivery systems and state-based characteristics. And then I'm hopeful that as we enter this next phase, there will be a good spirit of collaboration between the states and federal government.
Mm-hmm.
I think the federal government can play an important role in both guiding and helping states to achieve the results that we're all seeking. I'm very hopeful that we'll see more activity at the federal level and at the state level amongst the larger HHS ecosystem. So really appreciating that the CDC at the federal level, HRSA at the federal level are engaged in activities that relate to the things that state Medicaid agencies are involved in, helping to bring that together. I'm very hopeful that we'll see CMMI spend more time on Medicaid payment models or models that can include involvement from the Medicaid agencies. And so I think this whole idea of finding the individual champions and seeking the points of collaboration are really key to success.
That's so smart, and I think that's a great kind of conclusory set of comments, because I think it really is hopeful. I mean, I think that what I've always appreciated about Medicaid, and of course I'm talking about at the state level, but I'm sure this applies at the federal level too, is that convener nature of the program.
Mm-hmm.
To all the points you just made. You know, if you really get into that whole idea of a convener, I think you can build off that, right? Like clearly, across the entire ecosystem of stakeholders, there are going to be differences of opinions about what should be a priority and what shouldn't be a priority. And one of the most difficult things in Medicaid is to be able to pick one really good priority over 5 other really good priorities.
That's right.
But this idea of focusing on, even if you don't fully agree, but focusing on where you have commonality and common interest, and then kind of building out from there, I think is a really good place for us to be. And like you, I'm very optimistic. There's just so much work we have to do as a system. And I'm just really optimistic that the states and the federal partnership will be strengthened by good faith shown in both in the current administration, the previous administration, and really hope that lasts. Because if that happens, there's really kind of the sky's the limit, right? About what we can do and how we can see that.
Right.
That's great. Well, Penny, thank you so much for your time today. And again, congratulations so much. You are continue to be a rock star. And thank you for your time today.
Look forward to working with you more closely, Gabe, and really enjoyed our conversation today.
Great. Thanks so much.